Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. And as you'll already know from the title of the video and everything, it's Tainted Grail time. That's right. So I'm super excited to have a copy of this game. It hits all of my boxes. I love the Arthurian legend, I love story games, I love co-op games, I love Awakened Realms stuff, so I'm super excited to see what this is all about and what's going on in this, which is their latest Kickstarter. And if you're watching this, I don't know when you're watching it. If you're watching it the minute it came out, then thanks so much for watching. And also, this is not yet on Kickstarter. It's currently scheduled for Kickstarter sometime in February 2019. And if it's after that date, then the Kickstarter has already come and gone, but there might be late pledges. And if it's after that date, then come back to the channel, because we might have a copy when the final thing prints. Of course, that's all dependent on if it funded. And let's see if we can find out whether or not this is something you would like to fund. So come with me while we explore the mystical island of Avalon during a very dark time in its history. So the first thing I'll explain about Tainted Grail before we crack open the box and look inside is just very quickly that this is, of course, a prototype. It's a pre-Kickstarter prototype. However, it is also a very well put together prototype, so this will give you a very good idea of how to play the game and what goes on in it, but everything is subject to further development and changes following a successful campaign. However, of course, you will be able to get a very good idea of what the game is and what to expect from it from these videos. So what I'll do is I'll show you the components you need to know about to understand the game, and then I'll show you how to set up the Isle of Avalon and your character boards, and then I'll show you what you can do once you arrive on the island. Now, it is a storytelling survival game, so you will be surviving on the island as the island is overcome with darkness. Or in this case, it's called the weirdness. Tainted Grail is a campaign game, which means that you'll play through a full story that will take probably multiple sessions of gameplay. It's got 3 acts, and the acts are divided into chapters, and you can probably play through a chapter in about an hour to 3 or 4 hours. So the game really is a long journey, and you're going to have to try your best to survive and endure the hardships of Avalon. Tainted Grail is for 1 to 4 players, so it can be played solo or cooperatively. You will be exploring the island and trying to survive, and there is going to be a storytelling aspect. As you explore parts of the island, you'll receive scripted narrative events that you must make decisions through. During the survival part of the game, you'll be encountering monsters and wildlife, and also you'll be having diplomatic encounters, which you'll have to talk your way out of. And you'll be negotiating those challenges as well, trying to survive and trying to get away without losing everything. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need food to survive, and you're going to need your health as well if you want to strive and continue to explore Avalon and find out what's going on and what's causing this resurgence of the weirdness and a plague from the mainland called the Red Death. In Tainted Grail, you'll be taking on the role of one of these not-so-noble heroes. The noble heroes all went off to try and solve the problems of the town of Kaunacht, and these citizens are left and are going to have to step up because the heroes never returned. This is Beor the Smith, but Beor is not very well and has festering wounds. This is Maggot the Druid. Maggot is an outcast who betrayed the Druid people, and they all died. Maggot also has a crippling addiction to addictive things. And this is Eiley. She's a herbalist and she heals people, but she's also extremely traumatized by the events going on around her and has trouble sleeping at night. You will choose one of these 3 characters to play as and then take your appropriate character stuff. When you choose a character you'd like to play as, you take their character board. This is the first thing you'll need in addition to the mini in order to play that character. You'll also receive a deck of 25 combat cards, which are specific to your character. See, they've got your character's name on them. And a deck of 25 diplomacy cards, also featuring your character's name. And a set of combat cards that can be upgraded into using experience points gained during the adventure. You'll get a story letter introducing you to the game and who you are. You're also going to need a save sheet, and this is where you can also track things that you've unlocked, which you'll be asked to reference later. Finally, you'll need some universal markers to mark out your health and strength and resources. Also in the game is a deck of item cards, a whole bunch of decks of encounter cards, which represent different things you can encounter in the game. These are all different kinds of encounters. So here we've got some wildlife. Here we've got some diplomatic encounters, which may or may not be good. Here we've got some human encounters. And here we've got some mythical enemies. These are really, really hard. So all different kinds of things you can encounter during your adventures in Avalon. We also have here a deck of event cards. These event cards are random events that come out and affect you, and also contain story points as well that help you move along the adventure. We've got some land cards here. These are going to be laid out on the table, forming the different places you'll go. And we've got the Count Farmhold, which is where you start. More on how these are laid out later, but there's a whole big pile of these. Next we've got some ability cards here. These are going to be abilities that you can upgrade into with your characters, because the game does contain a leveling system as you go along. And then we've got some You Are Dying cards. Also featured are You Are Going Insane cards, which are given out when you're going insane. We've got some dice and bits we'll need to move monsters around and track stuff. And we've got a whole bunch of cool coins here that are going to be used as dials to track things and stuff. You may get more than this, you may not get this many, I don't know. They function as D8s and also coins you can flip. They also function as trackers. There we go, look at that, I got an 8. But I can also flip it. Oh, I got a skull, that's bad news. And I can also use this to count down the days until we die. Also featured in this game are these Menhir models. They're very fine looking models here, and these represent the Menhirs staving off the weirdness and keeping people safe. The problem is that the Menhir's light is going out, and when the light goes out, then weirdness creeps back into the world and creates darkness and kills everybody. So we're trying to keep the Menhirs lit, find more Menhirs to light up, and essentially try to keep ahead of the darkness as it spreads across the island. Of course, Avalon is a mystical, magical place, and it used to be the home of these guys, the Four Dwellers. The Four Dwellers are a badass race of people with 4 arms, and they're protecting the island, or they were until we wiped them all out. Or did we? The game comes with some Four Dwellers as well, so chances are that they're not all dead yet. Lastly, but probably most importantly, there's a storybook. This is called the Journal. Now note, this is a very fine prototype edition. You'll probably have a much finer looking book in your final copy of the game. But this is the Act 1 Journal, and it has all these different adventures and things that you're going to go on and have as you adventure around the Isle of Avalon. So I'm going to set all this stuff up, and I'll be right back to show you how I did that. So we start in the Count Farmhold, so the very first thing we're going to do is set that out. Now the Count Farmhold has a number of arrows pointing off here which give you different locations, so what you'll be doing is just matching these locations down to the Count Farmhold. So for example, here we've got the Hunter's Grove, which is location 102, and we match that up to arrow 102. Now, in the Count Farmhold, we have one of our Menhirs as well. And the Menhirs are the last bastions of light staving off the weirdness as it consumes Avalon. So we're going to put out a Menhir here, and this is important because we only put out cards that are within the 8 cards adjacent to the Menhir here in the Count Farmhold. When you're first setting up the game, just put out the cards that are adjacent to the starting card, which is the Farmhold. So we're going to put out card 103 here, the Warrior's Fair. We'll put out card 104, the Charred Conclave. And we'll put out card 105, the Forlorn Swords. Now we've got our starting island set up. The thing is, the Menhir is going dark and it's running out of time. So we're going to take one of our dials here, and we're going to note that it's going dark by setting a dial on the Menhir. If you're playing solo, then set the dial to 7. If you're playing with 2 or 3 players, then set the dial to 5. And if you're playing with 4 players, set the dial to 3. I've set the dial here to 5 because I'm going to play with 3 people. And every time we all take a turn and a day runs out, then we'll tick this dial down 1 to show that the days are running out, and we better light up another Menhir or refresh this one before we run out of time and the weirdness descends. Once the board is all set up, we'll take one model for each player who's playing in the game and put their characters here in the Count Stronghold. We're also going to have to arrange the event deck. The event deck contains a number of random events like beautiful weather, which are great and will really help us out, and violent thunderstorms, which are rubbish and are really going to hinder us. We're going to take a number of these random event cards and shuffle them and put them into the deck, but we'll also be stacking the deck with these story cards. And this is Act 1, Chapter 1, Part 1 of the Last Days of Count, and this is going to give you some flavor text about what's happening at the start of the game, and maybe even give you a little hint about what you should be doing and where you should be going. This will be put on the top of the deck with the random events put underneath, and as we turn over a card every turn, we'll be dealing with story and then events as we explore the world. And this will help us keep on track and help keep the story progressing. But remember, time is always running out. The menhirs are going out, and we're going to have to be making progress in spite of these events. Once you've set up your event deck, then you just shuffle your encounter decks and put those out somewhere where everybody can reach them. Shuffle your You Are Dying and You Are Insane decks and put those out somewhere nearby as well. Hopefully you won't need those, but chances are you probably will. You don't have to shuffle the ability cards because people will be able to go through this and choose them, so just put them somewhere where someone can grab them when they level up. Also, shuffle your item deck and put your item deck out near the board as well. You need your little dice set up somewhere nearby too. And now your decks of cards and things are all set out, we're going to have to set up a player board. Every character has 3 universal trackers, as well as different statistics along the outside of the board. Up here you've got a special ability that's unique to the character, and a special hindrance that's also unique to the character, as well as their name. Certain parts of this setup are universal to every character. For example, they all start on full health, which means we're going to take this health tracker and put it along the top of the board like this. As your health decreases, it limits the other trackers on your board. We're going to take these universal markers and stick one onto full stamina, and we're going to stick one onto 0 terror. This is important. You don't want to have any terror at all. Now, you'll also have some highlighted statistics and some darker statistics. The highlight statistics are your starting ones, so stick down a universal tracker in each of your highlighted statistic slots. Every character begins the game with some resources as well. Bayor begins with 3 food and a wealth, so you can mark that down with these universal markers like that. Shuffle your combat deck and place it nearby. Shuffle your diplomacy deck and place that nearby as well. You'll need those later. Your combat upgrade cards can be kept nearby, but you won't need to shuffle them because you'll be choosing these by going through the decks later. You might also need pencils probably to mark down on your save sheets. And just like that, we're ready and set up to play a 3-player game of Tainted Grail. So let's talk about how we're going to play this game, how we're going to explore the island and find out what's going on with the weirdness and stop it? Tainted Grail is a race against time, a race against the weirdness. And the Menhir is the death clock. Each day the death clock counts down by 1. And when it runs out, you'll have a very, very limited window to restart the Menhir or start up another one. The catch is that starting the Menhir requires a blood sacrifice of hit points. And every day that it's dark, there's no lit Menhir, you'll be losing hit points. So your window to relight that Menhir will be getting smaller and smaller until you're all snuffed out. That's the easiest way to lose the game. This means that we have to use our days wisely, maximizing our opportunities and trying to uncover the most of this mystery as we can. Each character has an amount of energy. We start with full energy, which is 6, and we'll spend that energy to take actions as we move around the island. These actions range from moving to exploring and reacting to the different things we find here on the map. We may also be called to spend energy and other resources during story encounters as well. Players can spend energy to take actions in any order, and they're not gated by turn order or even spending all of their energy. So Bayor can take an action, Maggot can take an action, back to Bayor, then over to Ailey, and you'll want to discuss the order in which you're taking actions and what actions you're going to take quite in depth before you start doing things, because you'll need a plan. This requires a plan, because if you don't have a plan, you're going to find yourself dying really hard on Avalon, because it is a ruthless and violent place. But it's also very rewarding, and when you work together keenly as a team, you'll discover the many mysteries and secrets of the island. After everybody has spent as much energy as they want, every player has passed, then we go into the end of the day phase, in which everybody must consume food, and then we'll have a chance to level up our characters, and finally they'll go to sleep. And if they're in weird places, they might have dreams, and if they're in a bad way, they might even have nightmares. During the night, we'll also heal and restore our sanity if we're not in a bad place. During the day, the most common action you might take is travel. Travel costs 1 energy and involves moving your model from one card to another. You might also take Explore. An Explore action is when you take the card that you're on and flip it over to reveal story elements on the other side. You'll start reading them and might go on a journey. You can also take the Location action. Each card has a location on it associated with the card. Now, travel and exploring costs an energy. The Location action has a price listed on the card. You can also inspect the Menhir. Now, this is only available in locations with Menhirs, and it's free. You can also form a party and disband a party. This is only available in the co-op mode, of course, because when you're playing solo, you'll have no one to form a party with. When you form a party, you just place your bases together, and then you move together. This will cost you each an action, and while you're together in a party, pretty much everything that affects one of you affects the other. So if one of you has to spend an energy, you'll both have to spend an energy. If one of you gains wealth, you'll both gain wealth. If you enter combat, you'll have to fight together as well. More on how the fighting works later. You can disband a party at any time and go your separate ways, except if you're involved in combat, or if you're undergoing a journey, a story journey, like an exploration. There are times when one of you might get too tired to continue the story and has to drop out, but you cannot voluntarily leave until the entire journey is over. First off, let's have a look at the travel action and how you explore these cards. Here we've got the island of Avalon, and we can pay an energy to go to any adjacent card on the island. In this example, Beor the Smith is going to travel to the Charred Conclave. Just in case it's not clear, you cannot travel diagonally, only orthogonally. Some locations have symbols up here which tell you what's going on with them. This location has a vision symbol, which tells me that if Beor rests here during the night phase, he will have a dream or possibly a nightmare. When you enter a location, you populate the cards around it. However, you only put down the cards that have numbered arrows indicating that a card is placed there that are adjacent to the Menhir. So if a card were to be placed here, I would not put it out because it's too far from a lit Menhir. If there are more lit Menhirs, you can light up more parts of the island. However, it's very unlikely you'll have more than one lit at a time or for very long because it's very difficult. So this says 107, so in this case I'm going to put out location 107 here because it's adjacent to the Menhir and adjacent to a character that's just moved. So we've discovered the settlement of Whitening. Now this also has a vision symbol, which means we'll be having dreams or nightmares here. It has this symbol here, which means it's a settlement, and it also has this symbol here, which means there's a Menhir. Now we don't actually put out the Menhir model until later when we activate the Menhir. But what this symbol means is that we can go here and perform the Inspect Menhir action. There's also the name of the action we can do here, trade with the townsfolk. Underneath that, we have some flavor text indicating what's going on here, and giving us a bit of an idea what might happen if we were to explore this location. Here we have the location that goes down the bottom. Now, if we take a look at the Charred Conclave, we'll notice that there's a lightning bolt on it. This lightning bolt is not present on all locations, but it is present here, and instead of a location action, what we have on the Charred Conclave is an immediate action. The lightning bolt indicates that the minute someone enters this area, this takes place. It says, draw a grey encounter when you enter this location, and this happens once per day, which means that now that Beor has triggered this, if Maggot were to move in later, it would not occur again, at least not until a day has passed. So when we draw a grey encounter, we take the top card of the grey encounter deck here, and we take a look. In this case, Weird Claimed. So these are some warriors that have been claimed by the weirdness, and we're going to have to fight them or run away. So we'll have a look at how that works in just a minute when we get to combat. In the meantime, let's assume Beor has escaped with his life or survived, and Beor is free to take another action. So that's the travel action, and as you can see, the board is beginning to fill up. You'll notice that on some occasions you cannot traverse between locations, and this typically means there's a geographical element blocking your way. For example, here, the Forlorn Swords and the Island Asylum cannot be traveled between because there's a big old river and cliffs. But you'll also know this because there's no arrow and no numbers. That just means that you cannot travel in this direction. For example, Beor cannot travel to the right of the Charred Conclave, but he can travel up to the Whitening and then travel east from there. The next action we've got is the Explore action, and this is great fun. So if Beor wants to explore the Charred Conclave, we'll just pick up this card and we'll have a look at the other side of it. So Beor has decided to explore the Charred Conclave, and we'll just pick up the card and flip it over. We can read the flavor text at the bottom here to give us a sense of what's happening if we haven't already. Then when we flip it over, we're treated to image that's relevant to the story of this location, and then we're given some flavor text and some instructions down the bottom. Now this says, if you're playing as Maggot, go to verse 10 in the journal, else go to the journal. So we can leave this location card with the exploration side face up just to show that Beor is currently engaged in an exploration action in this location. If you remember this, I showed you it during the components part. This is the journal with all the stories in it. And now that we're doing an explore action, we're going to be treated to a story. So if we turn to the appropriate page, you'll see here that we've got the Charred Conclave. And if we open up the Charred Conclave, at the top of the page we've got the text that's the same as on the back of the location card here. And then we've got a number of verses underneath. And these are numbered 1 through to a max. In this case it's 10. So he's received the story text, and then he's given 3 options. And what we would do is we'd read the parts in bold to the player who's having the exploration. And then based on their choice, we would follow the instructions here. And I'm not going to say much more than that because the journal is really exciting and interesting, and I don't want to spoil it for you guys because I want you to have your own adventures and explore this journal just as we've had fun exploring it on the channel. Suffice to say, as you go through the journal, you're going to be faced with different and interesting challenges, and these are going to have different costs to you as well. So you might have a challenge that's going to ask you to make a die roll and add your statistics, or it might ask you to spend resources, or make just difficult moral choices. Beor's exploration will end when the storybook says so, either at the end of a full story or when Beor decides he's had enough and bails. When the exploration is done, we'll simply flip the card back over and replace the model. So the next action we can take is the location action, and this is usually it's sort of like a little trade action or something you can do to trade resources around and find what you need. You'll have to pay close attention to this because there'll come a point where you need some magic, or you need some money, or you need more food because you've eaten it all and you're starving. So make sure you pay close attention to the location actions on the board. Some of them might be very, very different and critical. Others might be more commonplace, but still very important. On the whitening card here, we have a pretty standard action. This allows you to pay 1 food resource for 1 wealth resource, just offering a 1-to-1 exchange. Here on the Forlorn Swords, we've got a slightly more interesting location action. Pay 2 wealth, so you discard 2 icons from your board, and draw 1 random item from the item deck. You'll find many, many different kinds of exciting items in the item deck. Some are marked with S, which means they're story items that can only be gained from the journal and specific story events. So if you're instructed to take a random item, ignore the S marked items and just keep going till you find one that's not marked with an S and take that one. Up here we've got the Hunter's Grove, another interesting example of a location action. In this case, pay 2 energy and gain a food. I guess this represents you hunting. But then also draw a green encounter card. Now remember, these green encounters represent wildlife, and they can be very, very nice or very, very not nice. The last action we've got to detail here is the free action, Inspect a Menhir. Now, when you take the Inspect a Menhir action, you'll just jump to the area in the storybook that belongs to this location. So, for example, if you were here in the Kaunacht Farmhold, you'd go to Area 101, Kaunacht Farmhold in the journal, find the Inspecting a Menhir verse and read that to the player. This will give you some background and usually provide important context for where to go and how to explore the game. You see, all of the story, all of the flavor will give you clues on how to be successful. So you need to make sure you're paying attention to the narrative as well as managing your resources. So now we're going to look at combat and diplomacy. But first, let's have a look at our character boards so that we can understand our statistics, because these are going to be crucial to how we're going to fight. So here we have the player board for Beor, and we can see 6 different statistics around the outside. Now, these statistics come in pairs across the board in rows. So you've got paired here aggression and empathy, courage and caution, practicality and spirituality. And this is really, really important, because as we level up one side, we're going to find it more difficult to level up the other side. So you can see here that Beor is very, very aggressive, which makes him very good in combat, but he lacks empathy, and this is going to make him very bad at diplomatic incidents. In fact, if you enter a diplomatic incident as a party, Beor will probably be more of a liability than a help. But we'll understand that better later. As you accumulate experience points in the game, you can spend it to level up these statistics. And for every notch you have in the row, it will become more expensive. So for example, Beor here has 3 experience points now. He can spend 2 experience points to add 1 to spirituality or to practicality. And that's because he's already got 1 in that row. So to add another, he's got to spend 1 more than the amount in the row. If he puts 1 down in spirituality, then that means in order to get his last point of practicality here, he's going to have to spend 3. This means right off the bat, Beor's going to have to spend 3 to upgrade his empathy. However, he might choose to upgrade aggression again, instead choosing to ignore the empathy. If you're already at maximum points and you choose to upgrade this, then you can go into that abilities deck we were looking at earlier and have a look around. What you're going to find here are abilities that relate to the different stats here on your board. Here we go. Here's an example of an aggression ability that Beor can use. And there's 2 here. And so we can only pick 1 that we want. And when we decide which one we want, we just slide it under here to show that we've upgraded that to level 3, and now we've got an ability as well. One of the other things you can do when you're leveling up is upgrade the combat cards in your combat deck. You start with all these basic cards that have your name at the top and the name of the move at the top as well, but they're not very good, and you're probably not going to get very far if you don't upgrade these cards. You can buy upgraded combat cards from the improved combat card deck, which have better cards on them and have a price at the bottom. So you pay this cost, and then you can take these upgraded combat cards and add them to your combat card deck, and every time you add 1, you'll have to take something else out. This means that for every card that you take out, you'll be able to tailor your deck to your playstyle, and you'll have a better chance of drawing better cards when you're in combat as you take out the starting cards. So you'll find your stats coming up all over the place and being relevant in many different ways, particularly during the journal. It might say if you've got a courage of a certain level, you can take this option, but if you don't, then you can't. And really the narrator who's reading from the journal shouldn't read you that option at all, because you don't have it. But these are also very important to combat and diplomacy. So let's have a look at this weird claimed enemy that Beor encountered in the Charred Conclave earlier. Now Beor's got this combat encounter that he's going to have to deal with. Now he's by himself, which means he's the only one taking part in this combat. So whenever you're taking part in a combat by yourself, you'll draw 3 cards off the top of your combat deck. If you're playing with other players, you'll each draw 3 cards minus 1 per additional player in the fight. So if Beor and Ailey were in the fight, they would each draw 2 cards. But Beor's alone, so he'll draw 3. Beor will take a look at his hand, and if he doesn't like it, he can have a mulligan, discarding it and drawing 2 new cards, so he'll get 1 less. So combat will have us playing a series of cards, forming a sequence of cards along the table. We'll be trying to achieve a sequence of cards that climbs higher than the threat number of this enemy here. What we're looking at here are these symbols that match the statistics on our character sheet. And we're looking to match them to these symbols here on the enemy card. So for example, we can see that the threat symbols on Weird Claimed are aggression and magic. You'll note that magic wasn't one of the 6 statistics, but that's just to represent the fact we can use magic to attack our enemies. So maybe a good one to start with would be defend, because this matches up on the courage symbol. It's also the only one that does, because we cannot match 2 to 1. It must be like for like. So we've played defend to the sequence, and it adds 0 to our total combat because we're defending and not attacking, so it doesn't help us get up to that 5. Furthermore, the minute we play this card, we enact all of the text below. So this says, playing this card ends your turn. And then it also says, minus 2 wounds from attacks if last in the sequence. So this one's going to help us if we're going to get attacked. But it also ends our turn immediately. Now that our turn is over, we're going to check the weird card. And what we're going to do is we're going to look down at the enemy attack table here. And what this attack table says is that if there are 0 to 1 cards in the sequence, then we take 2 wounds and 1 terror. Fortunately, we played defend, which means we don't take any wounds from this event, but we will take 1 terror. The Beor player will go over to his board here and increase his terror by 1. And so at the end of the combat round, you choose 1 card in your hand to keep, you discard the rest, and then you draw up to 3 new combat cards from the combat deck. And now it's back to his turn. So now we have a look again and see if there's anything interesting we can do. You'll note that the advantage of defend here is now we have a lot more symbols to match. So this has really opened up our options. In fact, if we can play out all of these cards here, then we can actually defeat the enemy. If we have a look here at Intimidate, and this says improved because it's one of our upgraded combat cards, it says we get +2 if we're fighting in a grey encounter. So this is a skill that allows us to more easily defeat humanoid enemies. Well, we can play this one down here because it matches both here and here and here. But we'll play it using courage. If you ever play a card matched with magic, you must take a magic cube from your board and put it down here. So using magic to match up these tokens costs magic resources. So if we can do it without spending magic, then that's always preferable. These little plus symbols here just mean that you can play a card next in the sequence that has a 1 or 2 aggression or 1 or 2 courage value next to this card. So now we can play the powerful attack down here, and we can match up these two because of the plus symbol. And we don't want this to be the last in the sequence because it says receive an extra wound if last in the sequence when the enemy attacks. Also, this does give us a grand total of 5, which means we will kill the enemy before they get to attack, but we might as well throw down our battle chant here just because we can. Now, it's worth noting that as we add cards to this sequence, we cannot play them if our stats don't match up. This means that Beor, who's got a lot of aggression, is very able to add up these cards. Beor also has a courage, so he's able to play the battle chant. Eiley, on the other hand, has no aggression at all, and only 1 courage, which means that she's going to be a lot more limited when it comes to playing these cards in battle. In this case, Beor has won the conflict, so there's no need to do the enemy attack, and we'll move straight on to the rewards. As a reward for defeating this enemy, Beor gains 1 magic and 1 experience. Then we'll put the enemy card on the bottom of the deck. This is a green encounter card called the Vengeful Druid, and we're going to have a look at him real quick as an example of something, because he's got this ability here that says counter 0 value cards. So we're in a situation here where we've played defend and then 2 more cards, and what we haven't realized is his level 3 attack here is counter value 0 cards. And what that means is that all of our value 0 cards must be removed from the sequence. So we're going to take out defend. This means the sequence is split. And now these 2 cards here no longer have any application at all. And what this means is that we're going to have to find a card that fits in here. And that means that it syncs up with this side and this side. And that's going to be pretty difficult. So we might wind up cycling through lots and lots of hands, taking lots of these 0 to 2 attacks. We may even die before we find this card. On our turn, we can remove as many cards as we like from the end of the sequence. So if we really can't find a card that fits with Vengeful Druid and the Intimidate, we may well have to discard these 2 to open the sequence back up. When you're playing with a teammate, there's 2 of you in a party and you've entered into the combat, you're going to play cards together. Now, you can play them in any order you want, so if Beor and Eiley enter into the fight together, then Beor can play a card, Eiley can play 2 cards, Beor can play a card, etc. However, Eiley can only play cards that are compatible with her statistics, and Beor can only play cards compatible with his statistics. So in a fight, Eiley's much more likely to drag Beor down. Remember, because she's there, he has 1 fewer cards. So although they have 4 together, which is more than his 3 if he were alone, her cards are less useful. Similarly, in a diplomatic engagement, Beor is probably going to drag Eiley down. Because of her high empathy, she's going to have a lot more opportunities on the diplomatic front, and Beor is going to be dragging her down due to his lack of empathy. If you're ever in combat and you think, I can't win this, I run the risk of dying here, you can always flee. And when you flee in combat, you spend an energy, and then you take an attack from the enemy. Now, you will reference this attack chart again, and some enemies, they enrage and get tougher as the fight goes on and you get more cards in the sequence. Some enemies become weaker and more vulnerable as you get cards down in the sequence. What you really want to do is look at this sequence here and think, okay, if I'm going to run away, I'm going to take an attack. So I spend my energy and then I check the attack chart. Okay, so running away with 0 to 2 cards down gives me 2 wounds, which is bad. But if I can get 3 cards down, then he'll counter my value 0 cards, and then I'll get away with only 1 energy and not any wounds. So I want to try and play some cards before I run away if I can. And you will probably have to run away a lot, because there's a lot of really hard enemies in this game. Another kind of enemy you might encounter is one like this angry mob here, which has this G symbol, which says it's a guardian. And what that means is that it's going to go down on the board. When you escape from a normal enemy, they just go back on the bottom of the deck. But when you escape from this guardian mob, they'll go down here on the board and live there being a nuisance until someone comes and defeats them, or they wander off the board. And the way that happens is after everybody's passed in the day phase, and you're doing the end of the day phase, just roll this direction dice here, and this will tell you where they go. So in this case, they've gone north. Uh-oh. Poor maggot. Diplomacy is a similar event that acts a lot like combat, but with some subtle differences. Diplomacy is an encounter that takes place when you enter into a settlement. So whenever you enter a settlement that's not the Count farmhold, draw an encounter, a blue encounter card. And these can be anything from no real threat to big problem, gotta resolve it fast. So let's take a look at a blue diplomatic encounter. So Aili has wandered into the Whitening and discovered an encounter here called Desperate Measures, a blue diplomatic encounter card. We'll read the flavor text at the top. You're faced with an ultimatum. Either you rekindle the nearest Menhir, or the local settlers will bathe in your blood. Ugh. So first off, we've got an avoid option. Now this is the option we can take if we want to avoid the encounter entirely, and if we're someone like Bayor who's not very good at these, we may want to take this. Move to the nearest location with a disabled Menhir. Enable this Menhir immediately or fail. Well, enabling a Menhir is really expensive and very difficult, especially if you're by yourself in a game with more players. You'll probably need to gather your entire party in order to enable that Menhir. So, in the case of Ailea, who's quite good at diplomacy, let's move on to these next options. So we've got or take them out, or try to escape. Now these are three different options we've got, and we're going to pick one to explore. However, very occasionally, it says 1 and 2. In this case, if you pick this option, then you're going to have to progress through them in order, completing one first and then the other. We've got an or. It says here, talk them out. So let's say Ailey decides to talk to them and dissuade them from killing her. First thing we're going to do is grab one of our universal markers and put it down here on this affinity track. Now what we want to do is get the affinity track all the way up to the green success side here before it gets to the bottom red here and fails. So just like in combat, we'll draw 3 cards off the top of our diplomacy deck, and we can take a mulligan drawing 1 less. So now again we're matching up symbols on this side, and just like in the combat, we can only match symbols that both match each other and that we have the stats to play. So for example, we cannot play this card here because we do not have 2 caution. So this hand is pretty disastrous, to be honest. This one's going to cost magic to play and isn't really helpful. This one can't be played at all. And this one has a real risk of being bad if it's countered. And if we look here, it says counter the first card. So whatever we put down here is going to be countered unless we can win this entire encounter in one go. So you can always elect to pass. Now when we pass, just like at the end of the combat turn, we can choose to keep 1 card and discard the rest. So let's keep Risky Ploy. And we'll discard these 2 here. And then we can draw up to 3. However, because we passed without playing any cards, we can draw an extra one. So first we have to have a look at the opponent's move here. So the opponent's move is that we move down the infinity track. That's what this circle represents. And then also we're going to counter the first diplomacy card, but because we haven't played any, we can ignore that. So now we're down here on this red, and that's bad, because we're moving towards the failure. So what we can do here is we can start with Soothing Voice. We can match up Soothing Voice here because we've got empathy, and they match on empathy. And what we do is we check this symbol in the middle of the card, and we match it to the symbols here. So we've got both caution and empathy, and it says here, if infinity is red, move it up. And it is, so we will. And then it says receive no wounds and gain no terror if this is last in the sequence. Well, that's all nice and good, but we've got to play some more cards if we want to win this encounter. So here's a Risky Ploy. Now we'll play this one next. So now we're going to toss a dial and put it onto the card. And if it's the skull side up, that's bad news bears, but if it's the grail side up, we're going to get an extra card every turn, which is good. There we go, grail side up. So now we're going to get an additional card every turn, and we don't have to worry about it being countered. So next we've got Bribery, and I've matched this up on Caution. So this says all. So this is quite a strong card because it applies to all of the potential symbols we might be trying to match. However, I do have to pay a wealth from my player board here in order to use it. And we'll go up 1 more on the infinity track. Now the last card here I have, Cite the Holy Verses, doesn't fit because the spirituality symbol doesn't match to this card. Furthermore, I don't have any spirituality, so I can't play it. So with that, I can keep this card. Our enemy's going to do their counter, which means this moves back down to the center. They're going to count Soothing Voice. So I have to hope I get another card that fills this slot, or else I'm in trouble. So I draw back up to 4. I get an extra card because of the risky plot with the Grail symbol on it. So this will continue with the opponent's counter coming in and cards being removed, etc., until either we reach success or ends, or we decide we want to stop. If we choose to stop, we will experience failure. If we get down below here on the infinity track, we'll experience failure. If we get up here, we'll experience success. And the outcome is listed here on the bottom of the card. So here it says that we'll lose a reputation, or 2 if we chose to escape, if we fail. And it says we'll gain 2 experience if we succeed. And once we've completed the encounter, it goes back on the bottom of the encounter deck. We can proceed with our actions in town as normal. And so that pretty much covers everything you can do during the day phase and how you resolve combat and diplomacy and the actions. There's just a few little bits and pieces to wrap up before we go. So at the end of the day when you rest, you'll go back up to full energy. Unless you're exhausted, in which case you'll only gain 4. When we rest, we also gain 1 health and we lose 1 terror. So that's really helpful. If you're wounded, you'll never go above the blue wounded marker here. So if you're down to 2 life, you're in real trouble and you're really limited and you better start thinking about healing. So when you rest at the end of the day, you always have to discard 1 food. And this is to keep you on track. You're always going to need to... It's a survival game as well. You know, we're out adventuring in the wilderness. We need to stay alive. We need to eat food. If you don't have a food to discard when you rest, your energy does not go back up. In fact, you put it down to 0 if you have any left, and then just stay there, which means you're going to be exhausted next time as well. So you really need to resolve this food situation. Now, you can always trade with your friends and share things amongst you freely, provided you're in the same spot. So hopefully they'll come and help you out if you don't have any food left. You've got hit points here that you'll lose for various reasons over the course of the game. And if you ever get down to dying, you're not dead, but you're extremely limited. And you'll have to take one of these You Are Dying cards. So this is going to give you a bunch of limitations. It's going to give you some flavor text up here. And then down here it's going to give you some limitations. Cards are different, so you won't know exactly what limitations you'll get. If you're ever out in the wilderness and your terror gets above your hit point tracker like this, you are now what's called panicked. And that means that every time you have an encounter where you draw combat cards or diplomacy cards, you'll gain 1 fewer card. So being panicked is also quite limiting, and so you want to try and get your terror back down by resting and doing things that are nice. Although that's pretty hard on Avalon. If you ever get up to 5 or 6, you are going insane, and you have to draw a card from the You Are Going Insane pile. And again, this is going to limit you and give you limitations here. So this tells you that when you rest, you don't get any hearts, you don't get any dreams anymore, you only have nightmares. And when you you attempt to travel or explore, you toss a dial, and if it's skull up, you panic and your action's cancelled and your energy is not refunded. So this is very limiting. And these cards are attached to your character and they live with you for the rest of the game. You can never get rid of them. Now in the prototype here for the Kickstarter, we've only got these 3 characters, but it does say in the rulebook that if you do wipe out and you want to come back and play with your friends again, you can start a new character out in Kaunok. The problem is if they're miles away, then you're in trouble. If the Menhir ever goes out, and there's no lit Menhir, you're going to take 2 wounds and 2 terror for every turn you spend in a tile that's not around a lit Menhir. And so you really need to light up another Menhir because you're going to die very, very quickly. Now don't forget, you are the best of the worst. You're not the best of the best. You're not even very good. And Beor's got his festering wound, which says that whenever he's resting and he's hungry or exhausted, that means he hasn't eaten a food, or he's down here in the exhausted part of the energy track, he's going to lose a heart. Now, because you gain a heart when you're resting, that just means it stays put and nothing happens. But every character has their own issues to deal with, and that really helps to bring them alive, and really helps you to get into the mindset of these inferior heroes as they try to save Avalon, or just themselves. But this game really comes to life as you get stuck into the journal and you have all these encounters as you're adventuring around. So what I'd really like to do is take you on that journey with us. So if you're not too afraid of spoilers for this Act 1, Then I'll be back tomorrow with Michael and Ollie as we set off on a quest across Avalon. So I hope you'll come back and join us for that, and thanks very much for watching.